The horror renaissance that started in the latter 2010s has, if anything, only grown stronger. Throughout every year of the 2020s so far, horror fans have been blessed with one great movie after another. With all of these wonderful cinematic gems come many exceptional movie moments, the sorts of scenes that will be remembered and treasured for years to come. So let's check them out. I'm Adam, this is What Culture Horror, and here are some perfect horror movie scenes of the 2020s. Megan, Titanium. A psycho killer robot singing Titanium is one of those things you never really knew you needed. Megan, in which an inventor builds a childlike robot named Megan as a companion for her bereaved niece Katie, was a fun comedy in general and a flick that pleasantly surprised many people. It's got many memorable moments, yet one stands out amongst them. The evening after a school bully mistreated Katie, the now fiercely overprotective Megan, who actually killed the bully, puts Katie to bed and reassures Katie that she'll always protect her. Then she does something no one could have ever predicted. She sings David Guetta and Sia's Titanium as a lullaby. It's a moment that'll have everyone in absolute hysterics and is such an unexpected, bonkers nugget of comedy gold. Better still, despite how random it appears to be and how WTF it actually is, it kind of fits the story. Megan is telling the young girl she's looking after that she'll protect her to the end, so the lyrics about being bulletproof and indestructible feel weirdly appropriate. Also, Megan herself is basically made of titanium, so that's pretty clever. The Hunt opening scene. Amazing bits of cinema can come from absolutely anywhere. They can even be found within an otherwise disappointing picture. Just ask The Hunt, which has one of the best openings for a bad movie not only in recent years, but maybe ever. This is possibly the most disappointing horror film of the 2020s so far, although it wasn't meant to be a movie of this decade originally. It was meant to be released in 2019, but controversy over its content led to it being delayed for months. This, combined with the irresistible premise, made it an eagerly anticipated work, but alas, once it arrived it turned out to be a tame and shallow affair. Nevertheless, that opening scene was a thing of absolute beauty. The audience is introduced to a group of characters, some of whom are played by well-known faces like Emma Roberts and Ike Barinholtz. They will, and not unreasonably, assume that these characters are the main characters, and then they all get wiped out in a gloriously unhinged bloodbath that's as shocking as it is darkly hilarious. It's a devilish opening plot twist, and the only thing in the movie that's really worth remembering. Texas Chainsaw Massacre Party Bus. From one amazing scene in a bad movie to another, it's time to talk about Texas Chainsaw Massacre's party bus scene. This legacy sequel managed to annoy almost everyone in one way or another, what with its jarringly ugly tone, slapdash script, and poor treatment of legacy character Sally Hardesty. Nevertheless, it does have one genuinely jaw-dropping slice of blood-soaked mayhem hiding up its sleeve, and that's this scene where Leatherface carves his way through various partying Gen Z entrepreneurs on a bus. It starts off awfully, with all of the bus's occupants raising their phones at exactly the same time to film Leatherface, and one of them even says, "Try anything and you're cancelled, bro." As such, when this suddenly turns into the very best scene of the movie, and one of the best in the franchise full stop, it is quite the pleasant shock. A gnarly load of neon-soaked claustrophobic mayhem, this is an intense, gory knockout of a set piece that ever so briefly captures the terror of the 1974 original. This certainly wasn't a good movie, but this scene almost makes it worth seeing. Late Night with the Devil, Lily becomes possessed. Late Night with the Devil is a remarkable found-footage horror film that tells the story of a demonic event which unfolds during a live talk show recording. Talk show host Jack Delroy is desperate to boost his show's declining ratings and invites on an apparently possessed 13-year-old named Lily. Oh boy, big mistake. Around halfway through the film, at Jack's insistence, Lily's doctor instructs Lily to contact the entity that has possessed her, and it does indeed take her over. It's a rather low-key moment as possession scenes go, and aside from a brief levitation, it doesn't have the usual thrashing around and demonic chanting. This works particularly well, as it gives the scene a hauntingly naturalistic feel and is an event subtle enough to keep certain skeptics in the studio doubting, right up until they are proven fatally wrong at the end. It's also a fantastic possession scene in general. What makes this particularly impressive is that they were working with substantial stylistic limits, with the movie's camera work being designed to replicate the filming setup of a live talk show. And yet, this is still a ferociously frightening sequence, thanks in large part to the superb acting from all involved. Scream, Toxic Fans. Scream has proved to be a consistently strong franchise over the years, not least because many different villains have worn the Ghostface mask, meaning that these movies haven't become stale like many other horror series have. 2022's Scream Legacy sequel was extremely solid overall. Perhaps not the best in the series, but it did have quite possibly the most entertaining killer motivations. The killers turn out to be Amber and Richie, and in an absolute masterstroke, they were revealed to be toxic fans of the Stab franchise, the films within the films based on the events of each movie. Dissatisfied with the most recent installment, they're reenacting a new series of Ghostface murders so that a new Stab film can be made, one more in line with their vision. This was such a brilliant bit of commentary on toxic fandoms, an issue that couldn't be more topical right now. In an era where the internet has been plagued with moronic bullying fans, it was ever so satisfying to see this flick giving such people the finger. Another lovely touch was that it's mentioned that the controversial recent Stab movie was directed by the Knives Out guy, so this was evidently a reference to the online debating over The Last Jedi and a well-aimed shot at Star Wars fans. Beetlejuice, right here waiting. Beetlejuice was an unexpectedly decent legacy sequel, one in which director Tim Burton was allowed to really be himself and run riot, unleashing his unique personal style in all of its gothic, campy glory. There are many wonderful little bits throughout the film, including a corpse reassembling itself to the tune of Bee Gees' Tragedy and a razor-sharp homage to Carrie, but nothing beats this little nugget of gold from earlier on in the film. After her first reunion with Beetlejuice, Lydia Dietz manages to get herself back to the realm of the living, and she's now back in the attic of her old family home, which includes the model of the town that featured prominently in the original. Yet, Lydia hears something and she looks down to see a small Beetlejuice sitting on a model tombstone, serenading her with Richard Marx's Right Here Waiting. Sinister, spooky, weirdly sweet, and hysterically funny all at the same time, this is the most Tim Burton moment imaginable, and it's the kind of creative, idiosyncratic filmmaking that'll fill you with light. Never change, Tim. Never change. Immaculate, Cecilia gives birth. Immaculate was a perfectly okay Rosemary's Baby knockoff overall, but Sydney Sweeney's performance basically was the movie. She's the only particular reason to watch it, and she saved her best acting for the very end of the film, where her character, Sister Cecilia, gives birth to a deformed, possibly demonic baby, one which the film's villains forcibly impregnated her with. Shot mostly in an unbroken close-up, Sweeney single-handedly makes this one of the most disturbing, discomforting birth scenes in any recent movie, and delivers some of her finest work of her career so far. As if all of this wasn't already intense enough, it concludes with Cecilia lifting up a rock and killing the baby before the movie abruptly cutting to black. Immaculate is the kind of film you won't remember much of, but this scene will be buried in your mind whether you like it or not. Saint Maud, The Final Shot. Saint Maud was one of the first great horror films of the 2020s, and a bright spot in the sparse wilderness of theatrical releases during the year of 2020. It also boasts one of the greatest final shots of the decade so far, as well as quite possibly the most horrifying. Writer-director Rose Glass's debut concerns a nurse named Maud, who is spiraling into madness while trying to save the soul of a terminally ill patient. Tragically, Maud has completely lost it by the end of the story. She's killed her patient in a hallucinatory episode, she's alienated everyone around her, and finally, she decides to commit suicide by self-immolation. In her deluded mental state, she imagines herself ascending to heaven with angel's wings, yet the reality is confirmed to viewers in the most brutal of ways. We see Maud being burned alive and screaming in agony. The reality is only shown for a split second before the film cuts to black, but that split second alone will leave everyone shaken up. As disturbing as it is profoundly sad, this was a perfect full stop to the tragic narrative, one which reaffirmed this picture as having one of the best horror movie stories of the decade thus far. Saw 10, Cerebral Tissue Trap. Well, this was absolutely horrible. Jigsaw has forced his victims to do many horrible things over the years, but forcing a man to remove part of his brain tissue without any anesthetic? That definitely ranks among the worst. Once again, it's horrible, but thankfully, it's horrible in a good way, as the better Saw traps are. First up, it feels earned because it's been done to a genuine scumbag. Matteo and his associates were running a scam where they took money from cancer patients and pretended to cure them. As such, this avoids feeling too cruel and functions well as a display of gruesome karma, which is what the kind of story the better Saw movies tell. There's also something particularly poetic about it. The scammers had pretended to remove Jigsaw's brain tumor, so brain surgery was a great choice of trap here. Better still, the queasy gore effects, Kevin Groider's on-point directing, and a fine performance from actor Octavio Hinojosa makes this a gloriously disgusting, well-mounted set piece that acts just like the drill Matteo has to use. It goes right into your brain. Even if the premise of this trap was given away in the trailers, that didn't make it any less harrowing once it arrived on screen. Thanksgiving, the dinner from hell. Eli Roth has made plenty of duds throughout his career, so it was quite the shock when his latest horror flick, Thanksgiving, turned out to be pretty good. It's not a modern horror classic by any means, yet it is an infectiously entertaining homage to slasher cinema that actually outdoes most of the movies from that genre's heyday. It all leads to what is quite possibly the most disturbing Thanksgiving dinner ever committed to film, as the serial killer John Carver assembles various people he blames for a human crush on Black Friday the previous year. Like any great meal, this dinner is an irresistible mix of different flavors. It beautifully blends pitch black humor, nerve-wracking tension, and grotesque gore, thus fully embracing the heightened campy tone that made this movie work so well. In addition, the speech the killer gives to his victims about greed lands nicely, and all of the actors involved did fine work. As for the turkey in this particular meal, it comes in the form of a woman who's been cooked alive, decapitated, and trussed up. Carver then attempts to feed the corpse to the woman's husband, but thankfully they all manage to escape in time. A Thanksgiving 2 is apparently on the way still, even if it did miss its late 2025 release date without any explanation. Well, all that can be said is, good luck topping this moment. The Black Phone, the beating. The most horrifying moment in The Black Phone had nothing to do with Ethan Hawke's child-abducting serial killer at all, as sinister and well-played as that character was. It was actually this unflinching depiction of child abuse, a sequence so upsetting director Scott Derrickson had to fight to keep it in the film. In this moment, young protagonist Finney watches in horror as his alcoholic abusive father Terrence viciously beats his young sister Gwen, as he is disturbed by Gwen's apparent psychic abilities which her late mother had. It's a gut punch, but in a good way. It shows the abuse that the two siblings live with in a way that doesn't feel exploitative at all, and the performances in this grueling scene are superb. In an otherwise relatively conventional, though still very solid horror film, this hauntingly upsetting moment was by far the most daring, memorable segment, as hard to watch and upsetting as it undeniably was. When Evil Lurks, the dog attack. Many horror movies have that one horrific scene you'll never ever forget. In Hereditary, it was Charlie's decapitation. In Mother, there was the baby being devoured. And in this brilliantly nasty Argentinian horror, we've got a demonic presence possessing man's best friend and savagely attacking a little girl. Yikes. In When Evil Lurks, a town in rural Argentina is being troubled by a demonic presence, and protagonist Pedro arrives at his ex-wife's house to get her and their two sons away. Sensibly, he makes sure to burn his clothes so that the infection doesn't spread, but just before he does so, the family dog licks them. And then, this adorable pooch proceeds to viciously maul Vicky, the daughter of Pedro's ex and her new husband, and then drags her away to her death. Although Vicky does subsequently reappear, it's implied that this was a trick by the demon and that she was indeed killed. This was just shocking. The slaying of a young child is the kind of thing that many American horror flicks would be too frightened to do, so this was already a startling taboo buster as it was. Most of the attack is off-screen, with the bone-chilling sound design doing the heavy lifting. This honestly makes it even worse. As many a great horror film has proven before, your imagination is often even more terrifying than anything on screen. It's absolutely horrible and unforgettable all the same. Together, two become one. At its best, horror uses the macabre and the other to highlight our deepest wounds and society's deepest fears in the darkest ways imaginable. That's exactly what Together's climax does. It represents codependence in romantic couplings in a literal, horrifying, and unforgettable manner, as struggling couple Millie and Tim find their bodies are starting to fuse together as part of a supernatural ritual. They resist for as long as they can, but after Millie sustains a fatal wound, they accept their fate and fuse together in a deeply discomforting sequence. In particular, their eyeballs joining together, icky stuff. This is something you'll never be able to unsee, not that you'd necessarily want to. There's a strange undercurrent of sweetness to this entire sequence that makes it unmistakably poignant, as much as it'll also make you a bit queasy. Also, the music choice of the Spice Girls to become one, that was an ingenious needle drop, one that would even make James Gunn proud. Nope, Jean Jacket devours the crowd. Jordan Peele's alien-themed sci-fi horror was a pretty mixed bag, yet it was the strongest statement of Peele's mastery behind the camera. Working with a bigger budget than ever before, he delivered a visually stunning piece of cinema, nowhere more so than in the movie's most horrifying sequence, in which its antagonist, an alien creature who looks just like a UFO and is nicknamed Jean Jacket by the main characters, devours an entire crowd of people. Businessman and former actor Ricky Park, nicknamed Jupe, has been trying to domesticate Jean Jacket by feeding it horses, and he eventually hosts a big stage show where he plans to show off the creature to a live audience. Big mistake. Jean Jacket arrives and devours everyone, including Jupe, in a horrifying sequence. The sounds of the victims screaming combined with the claustrophobic, gruesome visuals of them being dragged through Jean Jacket's digestive system make this a viscerally disturbing display of power from this unique movie monster. It was also a masterful way of hammering home Nope's key themes about the exploitative nature of spectacle and the Hollywood machine. Titan, the hybrid baby. Julia Ducournau's flawed yet fascinating body horror flick features not only one of the best horror movie endings of recent years, but one of the biggest WTF moments of the decade so far. That's pretty fitting, as this tale of a female serial killer with an erotic fixation on cars is one crazy-ass movie. Throughout the picture, main character Alexia is pregnant and her body has begun breaking down, seemingly turning into metal. This comes to a madcap crescendo at the very end when she finally gives birth with the help of Vincent, a man with whom she's formed a surrogate father-daughter relationship with. The birth ultimately kills Alexia, but the baby survives, and her newborn is a hybrid baby with patches of titanium on their skin. What? Once again, this ending is mad, though that mustn't be misread as a criticism. Not only is this moment a delirious and dizzyingly creative excursion into the surreal, but it's also genuinely moving in its own unique way, as Vincent acknowledges the baby as his own. It's hard to imagine Ducournau delivering anything quite as WTF as this in her upcoming film Alpha, but then again, who knows? If there's one thing this modern master of body horror has definitely proven, it's that she's not to be underestimated. Halloween Ends, the procession. Sure, Halloween Ends was a messy, divisive sequel that annoyed so many fans, and it was, not unreasonably, deemed a disappointing conclusion to David Gordon Green's Halloween trilogy. Having said that, it's worth watching for this ending alone. After all these years, we finally have a proper ending to the story of Michael Myers. No more resurrections, just a full stop on a story that should have ended a long time ago. Still better late than never. After Laurie Strode successfully kills Michael, the entire town of Haddonfield have a procession, following Michael's body as it is transported via car to the scrapyard. Many characters affected by Michael's crimes are shown walking in the group, and there's a cathartic sense of everything coming full circle and the town finding some peace at long last. Finally, the car stops and the townspeople, liberated of their nemesis, carry Michael's body over to an industrial shredder, where Laurie and her granddaughter destroy it, preventing him from ever coming back. Although it is a don't think too much about it, just roll with it moment, it is cathartic and satisfying in its own way. Also, as you'd expect from this series, it's got a fabulous John Carpenter score to boot. Talk to Me, Riley is Possessed. The debut feature from Danny and Michael Philippou was a great success overall and another testament to the power of Australia's horror scene. As well as ranking in the upper tier of horror films this decade, it also featured one of the all-time great possession scenes. There have been many possession scenes in horror movies over the years. Few have ever been quite as harrowing as this one though. In this case, some teens take turns in using a mysterious severed hand to contact spirits, and when it's Riley's turn, he appears to be possessed by the spirit of protagonist Mia's late mother. Mia is so overcome by emotion, but she allows Riley to remain possessed for too long, meaning that he then becomes overtaken by spirits which nearly force him to commit suicide. In a horrific and gory sequence, he repeatedly bashes himself against the walls and even tries to pluck his own eye eye. It's a sequence which will have even the toughest horror fans watching through their fingers, and it single-handedly confirmed the Philippou brothers as horror directors to watch. Men birthing. Cinema might be over a century old, and yet it's still constantly doing things you've never seen before, even now. The climax of Alex Garland's surreal folk horror Men is one such moment. It's the kind of scene that'll leave you staring agape at the screen, wondering what on earth you just saw. The supernatural man who has been pursuing protagonist Harper throughout the movie abruptly becomes pregnant and gives birth to another of himself, who then gives birth to another of himself, who then gives birth to another of, yes, himself, who finally gives birth to a figure that appears to be James, Harper's late husband. It's gory, it's grotesque, it's completely and utterly insane. Whatever viewers think of this polarizing horror flick, no one is ever going to forget this brilliantly unhinged slice of surrealism and mad excursion into the fantastical. In the Earth, into the Mist. In the Earth ranks among the most criminally underrated horror movies of the decade so far. Not only was it underseen, but it's also got a shockingly low IMDb score of just 5.1. And for context, that's a lower score than Adam Sandler's Grown Ups 2, and it does not do it justice at all. A smashing psychedelic horror flick from the magnificent Ben Wheatley, this sees him deploying the razor-sharp cinematic tricks that made films like Kill List and A Field in England modern British indie classics, which was lovely to see after he'd made 3 unsuccessful films in a row, those being High Life, Free Fire, and Rebecca. The apex of the movie comes when secondary lead Alma tries to navigate some hallucinogenic mist, only for it to leak through her hazmat suit. As a result, she's subjected to terrifying psychedelic visions. When protagonist Martin pulls her out of the mist, Alma is harrowed and distraught. The sequence sees Wheatley and co. using all of the tools in the film playbook to place viewers right in Alma's shoes, using disorientating editing, a chilling soundscape, and terrifically frightening visuals to deliver a nerve-wracking assault on the senses. The Ugly Stepsister, Mutilation. Many horror fans won't have seen The Ugly Stepsister yet, and that needs to be rectified, for this twisted adaptation of Cinderella is a body horror tour de force to rival the substance. It features many stomach-churning moments, and, just like the best body horror films, it uses them to represent its central themes in the most disturbing of ways. This particular work takes aim at the absurd beauty standards of the past and features plenty of gnarly body modifications that'll have you watching through your fingers. Nevertheless, it saves the toughest for last, as protagonist Elvira mutilates her own foot so that she can fit into Cinderella's famous glass slipper. Yikes. With the superb acting and nausea-inducing gore effects, this was already awesome enough. But what makes this particularly great is that it actually comes directly from the source material. This does indeed happen in the Brothers Grimm version of Cinderella. For obvious reasons, this is left out of most adaptations of the tale, and as such, it's interesting to see this finally represented on the big screen. Nevertheless, there's more to it here, with the act being driven by desperation and toxic parenting from Elvira's horrible mother, not simply by greed or malice as it was seen in the source material. So this represents writer-director Emily Blichfeld clearly playing with and reframing a tale as old as time. Beau is Afraid, Orphans of the Forest. More than possibly any other horror film released this decade, Ari Aster's Beau is Afraid is a true original. There's nothing quite like it. It's no exaggeration to say that there's at least one WTF you've never seen that before moment every quarter of an hour throughout this film's mammoth 3-hour runtime. Its most captivating sequence is the unforgettable Orphans of the Forest segment, where Beau comes across a theatre troupe in the forest who are performing a play, one which Beau then imagines himself as the protagonist of. The play tells an almost biblical fable about a depressed man searching for his lost family, so it neatly ties in with Beau is Afraid's core themes of family and mental illness, and it unfolds as an extraordinary mixture of live action and animation. Aster worked with Chilean animators Cristobal Leon and Joaquin Cosina, who directed 2018's The Wolf House, for this visually exquisite sequence, and the pair deployed a multitude of different animation techniques in order to create this unique, beautiful, and profoundly moving excursion into the absurd. The results were undeniably stunning. Beau is Afraid was a polarizing picture, and sure, it is self-indulgent and somewhat messy, but it's also pretty awesome in its own unique way. It's such an audacious piece of cinema, and it's worth watching for this animated sequence alone. Bodies, 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 The Argument. Bodies, Bodies, Bodies is a bitingly brutal horror comedy in which a group of monumentally toxic, unlikable rich kids find themselves descending into paranoia and violence when trapped in one of their mansions during a hurricane. They start to be picked off one by a killer, or so it would seem. It's a consistently punchy and entertaining watch with many smashing moments. Some might remember the ending twist the most, the fact that the first death was an accident and the night of carnage was for nothing, but the movie's peak arguably comes a little earlier than that in the form of this exceptional argument scene, which shows Sarah Delap's angry, acidic screenplay at its very best. Here, the remaining characters descend into a sharply written war of words as they furiously berate and accuse each other, with all of their insecurities and toxic traits on full display. You could cut the tension with a knife, and when Jordan shoots Alice in a rage, this seemed like an inevitable release of years of pent-up resentment. Terrifier 3, The Shower Massacre. Terrifier 3 is known to have left many audience members feeling physically ill, and it was probably this sequence that set people off the most. It was clear that writer-director Damien Leone was trying to top the infamously gory Terrifier 2, and though nothing in this film quite topped the infamous murder of Ali and its predecessor, it did still deliver the franchise's goriest moment to date. And that is the murder of Cole and Mia. This couple are getting it on in a shower when Art the Clown bursts in with a chainsaw. Being his usual sadistic self, he gruesomely dismembers them both and literally uses the chainsaw to, penetrate Cole up the rear. It's an absolutely disgusting moment, sure, but it's also an awesome scene in its own right, no matter how sick it may make you feel. While the previous film was arguably too sadistic in giving its nastiest death to a completely innocent character, this sequence happens to the most irritating characters in the movie. That's not to imply that they deserve this in any way, but it does make it easier to digest. It also makes it easier to appreciate everything this scene does so well: Thornton's god-tier performances art, Leone's intense direction, the masterful gore effects, the effectively ironic soundtrack, and the well-judged tone, which mixes cruelty and black humor to great effect. The Invisible Man, The Restaurant. Sometimes you're watching a movie and along comes a scene so great that you instantly know it'll be iconic and remembered for years to come. And such was the case here. Watching the reaction videos for this one is always an absolute treat. Leigh Whannell's fantastic adaptation flips The Invisible Man, modernizing it as a story of a woman named Cecilia who has been stalked by her abusive ex-boyfriend Adrian, who's engineered an invisibility suit that allows him to attack her in a variety of awful ways. At this point in the story, he's already turned Cecilia's sister against her by writing a spiteful email in Cecilia's name, and he's also turned her best friend by hitting his daughter and framing Cecilia for it. Unfortunately, Adrian is only just getting started. When Cecilia meets her sister Emily at a restaurant, they begin to reconcile, and then Emily notices a knife hovering next to Cecilia's head. This knife then flies over, slits Emily's throat, and is immediately placed in Cecilia's hand, framing her for her sister's murder. Brutal, yes, but so brilliant. This is exactly how you do a jump scare, and this will go down alongside deaths like Samuel L. Jackson in Deep Blue Sea and Terry in Final Destination as one of the best shock deaths in horror history. Bravo! Pearl, Mia Goth's Oscar-worthy monologue. Award bodies are famously reluctant to award actors for their work in the horror genre. Looking at scenes like this one, it is so difficult to understand why. As Pearl, a burgeoning serial killer in the American South, Mia Goth delivered a genuinely award-worthy performance. Nowhere was Goth better than in this staggering 8-minute monologue, captured mostly in one unbroken close-up. In it, Pearl pours her heart out to her sister-in-law, revealing her crimes, her crippling insecurities, and her loneliness, and it is downright gut-punching. Despite the many terrible things Pearl has already done, and the other terrible things she will do, as shown in this movie's predecessor X, of which Pearl is a prequel, you really feel for her. Goth's achingly vulnerable, tragic performance deserves all the praise in the world. There are so many lines in this monologue that will be painfully relatable for many, even if they're being spoken by a deranged killer. Barbarian, Into the Tunnels. Zach Cregger's Barbarian is an intoxicating horror knockout. You never know exactly what's coming next. It's a movie that's constantly evolving, changing, and subverting expectations in the best possible way. It begins with the simplest of setups. Two strangers, Tess and Keith, end up in an Airbnb together, which has been double booked by mistake. Things don't stay that way for long, believe that. Soon, Tess finds a mysterious tunnel in this seemingly ordinary house, and she and Keith venture deeper and deeper inside this strange network of tunnels. This is a great metaphor for the movie itself. It starts out normal enough before going further and further down the rabbit hole into all-out depravity. Furthermore, this entire sequence is a complete masterclass. It's a slow burn that builds the tension up and up and up until the suspense is genuinely unbearable before Kreger finally drops his ingenious crescendo. A giant, deformed, naked woman lumbers out of the shadows and gruesomely kills Keith, the apparent co-lead, before she goes for Tess. And then it cuts to black and the film then goes to a completely different character elsewhere. What the hell is this? That's what audiences will be thinking. But in the greatest kind of way. This is terrifying, unpredictable, perfectly paced, ingeniously directed. It's horror cinema at its very, very best. Nosferatu, The End of Count Orlok. Much like the silent classic it adapted, Nosferatu is a horror tragedy in which an innocent woman must sacrifice herself to stop Count Orlok's reign of terror. Writer-director Robert Eggers fully understands this, and concluded the movie with a devastating emotional gut punch. 2024's outstanding Nosferatu remake took full advantage of its longer runtime and more detailed character work in order to make the character of Ellen a more developed character than in the original. You know her death is coming, and does that make it any easier to take? Not in the slightest. At the end, as in the original, Ellen allows Count Orlok, who has an evident desire for Ellen, to drink her blood, distracting him long enough for the sunlight to come through the window and kill him. While 2024's Nosferatu isn't quite as outstanding as the 1922 masterpiece, it does arguably do this scene quite a bit better. Alongside the fantastic visuals, it does several things that the original could never have got away with. The gore flows freely and the scene has an unmistakable sexual tone, highlighting the complex connection between Ellen and Orlok. As much as horror remakes are generally a terrible idea, in the right hands they can reinterpret the source material in powerful ways, as this example shows. Weapons, that insane finale. Being the horror mystery that it was, why did 17 children from the same classroom disappear in the middle of the night, and where did they go? It was always likely that Weapon's success would rest on whether or not writer-director Zach Kreger would be able to put together a satisfying denouement. And did he succeed? Oh yes. This fantastically good horror epic beautifully weaves its various plot threads together into an absurdly satisfying whole, providing thought-provoking endings for all of its characters alongside a satisfying, logical solution to the main mystery. It all comes to a head in the form of a brutally suspenseful climax in which the movie's captivating villain, Aunt Gladys, getting her comeuppance after using her sinister powers of control to try and kill the movie's protagonists. It's an overwhelming crescendo of suffocating dread and fierce combat, and it is gloriously satisfying. Young Alex, who suffered more than any other character in Gladys's hands, cleverly uses Gladys's magic against her by sending all of the children she stole after her. In a darkly hilarious and excellently shot sequence, the kids chase Gladys through the neighborhood and eventually catch her and literally tear her apart. A satisfyingly sadistic death for this evil, evil woman. One can only imagine with trepidation what Zach Kreger is cooking up for movie number 3. Sinners, I lied to you. There's a rather good meme online which consists of a picture of the great Martin Scorsese extending his arms with the words "Absolute Cinema" being written above. And there's a particular scene from Sinners, Ryan Coogler's stunning vampire musical set in the American South, which could be summed up literally by that meme. The scene in question sees one of the main characters, Sammy, performing his song "I Lied to You" in the new juke joint set up by the Smokestack Twins on opening night. His music is described as having the power of transcendence. It is so potent that it blurs the line between life and death, in other words. And so, as Sammy performs his wonderful tune, the spirits of past and present fill the joint, with the roaming camera capturing this startling imagery in a stunningly beautiful dreamlike sequence that rivals the cinema of the late great David Lynch in its transcendent surrealism. It's pure movie magic, an exhilarating testament to artistic creativity and what a film can actually do. In other words, it is absolute cinema, and it is freaking glorious. The Substance, Monstro Elicisu. The Substance, in which aging star Elizabeth Sparkle uses an experimental drug to create a younger, more perfect version of herself, nicknamed Sue, is not only one of the greatest horror movies of the 2020s to date, there's also a strong argument to be made that it's one of the greatest horror movies ever. It's a picture absolutely flooded with moments of pure cinematic perfection, yet it saves the best for last, as Elizabeth Sparkle's attempts to stay youthful finally result in Sue giving birth to a monstrous hybrid of both the younger and older versions of Sue. This hybrid still attempts to host a New Year show Sue was contracted for, and it doesn't go to plan in the slightest. Her body breaks down and showers the studio and audience in blood. Showcasing Coralie Fauchard's practically perfect directing and some of the best practical effects this side of The Thing, this entire sequence is a complete masterclass. Furthermore, by acting as a grotesque and horrifying metaphor for the cruel, misogynistic beauty standards women are regularly subjected to today, this is also a wonderful display of exactly what horror cinema should be. It reflects a sad truth about our world in the most shocking, unsettling of ways, and the amazing final shot, Elizabeth's detached face melting on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, is the cherry on top of the deliciously dark cake.